I am Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to StansberryInvestor.com. Very excited to welcome my next guest today, who really has an eclectic background. He's a former childhood star. You may have seen him in Mighty Ducks and also Silicon Valley. He is also involved in politics. He ran as an independent in the US presidential race. But right now, he's really dedicated most of his focus to Bitcoin. He's one of the wealthiest investors in the world in the crypto space. He's also the chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation. I'm thrilled to have him on today. Please welcome to the show, Brock Pierce. Brock, it's been a long time coming. Thank you for joining me here on StansberryInvestor.com.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be present with you here today.
Thank you. And I'm happy to share you with my audience. I know you have a lot of thoughts on this space. But let's start first with what I call your real mission is to change the global monetary system and to convert it to crypto. I want to learn more about what converted you or what led you to really focus in and hone in all your energy on Bitcoin.
Well, you have to go back to my childhood. I grew up playing video games like a lot of people have. And when the internet really started to emerge, our video games eventually became networked. And you were able to create persistent worlds or virtual countries. They called them massively multiplayer games. You may have heard of World of Warcraft or Second Life, any of these things. And I was one of the first people to recognize that just because something was intangible didn't make it less valuable, that people were willing to buy and sell the digital currency or the digital assets that existed in these virtual countries, these persistent worlds. And so I became the main market maker in the world, buying and selling the digital currencies across thousands of different game servers, or think of them as small virtual nations, some of which not that small, but I did that for about a decade. So I got into digital currency in the late 90s. We built up a team of about 400,000 people, principally in China, that would play these games professionally to mine those currencies. We were PayPal's largest merchant for years. We were instrumental in the launching of Alipay. And so I'm not sure there was any other path for me.
Wow.
It was inevitable that I would be an active participant in this field, considering my background.
So a little bit more there, because that's fascinating. So you got in early, obviously, in Bitcoin. I mean, when was the first time you really heard about it and were like, oh, I need to start investing here?
So I was an early participant, and following the market adoption. And so I was of the opinion that Bitcoin or something like it was inevitable and the future. And the question is just, how long will it take to reach enough critical mass to pick up that speed to get to escape velocity? And so it wasn't really until 2012 where I was like, okay, this is happening now. This is really starting to take off, and I can see the entire sort of road ahead. I better drop everything I'm doing to work solely in this space. And so I was a very early miner. I was starting a new company every, call it 45 to 60 days. I was chairman of the Mastercoin Foundation, where we invented the ICO, the first ever ICO. I was founder of Blockchain Capital, the first venture capital fund in the space that funded all the Coinbases, Krakens, BitGos, and most of the early industry. That's on its fifth fund, anchored by Visa and PayPal. $300 million fifth fund. It's one of the best performing venture funds of all time. I was co-founder of Tether. We invented the stable coin, created the US digital dollar that's doing, call it $50 trillion a year in transactional volume right now. And this is where all the central bank digital currency stuff is coming from. Started the first crypto bank in the world, created the first digital security token, BCAP, recognizing how all the world's stocks and bonds will eventually settle over this technology. And there's 100 or 200 other things that I've done in the field, but I don't think we need to go too far down that rabbit hole.
I mean, you are a real pioneer in the field. You make me think a lot of, the work that Michael Saylor has done in the space as well. And when you ran as a independent presidential candidate, I mean, this was a big part of your platform. Do you think that's going to be the future for politics in the future, that people are going to want to see this from their candidates, more of a platform geared towards crypto?
Well, I think we're going to see it in the midterm elections next year. Remember, the crypto community is now 300 million people, tens of millions of Americans. They're fairly well resourced. They've got access to capital, which matters in elections. And generally, we're single issue voters. We don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. If you're for creating a better future, a future that can work for all of us, a future that can work for everybody, and you're forward thinking, you're probably going to get the support of this community. We're really single issue voters. And so what we just saw in this infrastructure bill, and members of the House and Senate that had never done any research, really have no understanding of what this technology is, but voted against it without, I'm cool with people that we can agree to disagree, but I do have a problem with elected officials voting on things that are going to affect our collective future without having done any work. And that's what we saw a lot of in that sense. Like, well, you're reckless. You're trying to cause massive harm to the people without actually having done any research. This is really important stuff for our collective future. The fate of the United States in many ways is going to be impacted by this. This is the fourth industrial revolution, and there's going to be winners and losers, and our governments and our regulators and our elected officials have a role to play in this. And I hope they make sensible decisions that supports our collective well-being.
And let's talk about that then. In your perfect ideal world, what does the financial landscape look like? Is it one without central banks? Is it one where everyone is just transacting in crypto? What does it look like for you?
Well, I mean, these things are not mutually exclusive. Governments are going to continue to need to have access to things like credit. But what we will see in some places is, in the same way that we had the separation of church and state, we're going to see in some countries the separation between state and bank, specifically in countries that have been irresponsible. What Bitcoin is really doing from a philosophical perspective is it's bringing accountability, back in places where it's been severely lacking. It's bringing transparency to, an opaque sort of market, and it's democratizing opportunity so that everyone in the world has access, and it's democratizing the utility, the tools. 4 to 4.5 billion people on the planet are on or underbanked. The majority of the population of the world do not have financial tools. In this day and age, if you were going to put together Maslow's hierarchy of needs today, you'd say that having a device with a connection and financial tools would be essential to the pursuit of happiness. And so, and there's no one to blame here. We're not here to judge, right? Take a look at banks. I'm not against the banks. I'm not against central banks. I'm for everyone. I'm trying to figure out, how do we collectively win? How do we create all win situations? And again, it's not single threaded. And so that's really kind of the hope. And back to the banks, it's not their fault. They're businesses with fiduciary duties. And as a business, it's their obligation to make money for their shareholders. And then you have regulations and compliance costs that are high in such a way that it's unprofitable to bank the poor. And because of that dynamic, 4 to 4.5 billion people on the planet have been, effectively forgotten. But the system is, you don't hate the player, you hate the game. We basically need a systems upgrade. And that's what technology is doing. Technology and innovation is allowing us to upgrade, existing systems to build them better than we did before.
Really well said, Brock. Let's talk about the regulations and crackdowns happening in China. Who wins, who loses here? Will the government be victorious in stopping crypto? Or, as many other experts have stated, it's impossible to stop. You can't stop Bitcoin.
Well, you can't stop it, but you can impact its presence in your country. Clearly, all of the Bitcoin miners in China have had their businesses incredibly disrupted. They basically had to pack up all their things and ship it out all over the world. Those Bitcoin miners are financing energy infrastructure development, clean energy infrastructure. So that effect is helping, clean up our energy grid. And so I think it's a wonderful thing. Obviously at China's expense, but the United States is benefiting in a huge way, as are a number of other countries. There's winners and losers. So, that's happened. Now with their more aggressive crackdowns, that's effectively going to impact all of the Chinese entrepreneurs and Chinese businesses that were making billions or tens of billions of dollars, for their people. Now all of that wealth is going to shift over, I hope as much as possible to the United States if we make the right decisions. if we don't make the right decisions, it'll end up in Europe, Africa, Central, South America. You can't stop it. It's just going to go where it's most welcome, which is why it's so important as a government to support innovation. You imagine if the internet, effectively what they did in this infrastructure bill is imagine some shipping bill in 1996. If on the back of that bill, they basically said, we're going to regulate the internet out of existence. That wouldn't have stopped the internet. It just means America wouldn't be the capital of innovation anymore. And so this stuff really matters. And that's effectively, why this matters. Imagine what the world would look like today if the internet didn't exist in the United States, if cell phones didn't exist in the United States, if all of these things weren't here, we'd probably look more like Venezuela or Iran or North Korea. It's important that you as a nation are participating in innovation and change. You can't stop change. Change is a constant in the universe. The question is, are you in the water with your board ready to ride it or get pummeled by it?
When you say it depends on, whether the US, how they react, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a concern then on your part that the crackdown in China would spill over to the US? Ray Dalio has said, look, if Bitcoin gets too big, regulators will stop it here in the US.
Yeah, so Ray Dalio, I appreciate, most of his comments. He's clearly has a keen understanding of what's going on in the financial system, how over $20 trillion have been printed, throughout this COVID period, unprecedented devaluation of fiat currency, which is why we're seeing, the stock market performing the way that it is. We're seeing the housing market performing the way that it is. Those markets are not really up. Maybe the pharmaceutical companies, but generally speaking, it's the dollar and currency that's in decline. It's the illusion of growth. It's called, we printed so much money, the money has to go somewhere. And so Ray, I think, understands all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to the technical infrastructure and the resiliency of the Bitcoin network, I think his comment suggests that he still has some learning to do.
Help me understand, Brock. Help me understand this point. If there's a finite number of Bitcoin, right? How can it solve a global problem? How can everyone get a piece of the puzzle?
So again, I don't think the whole world is going to just run on Bitcoin in the future. It's a possibility, but I think it's unlikely. There's going to be many systems, including government run systems, central banking run systems. We're still going to need credit to do a lot of things, and these systems are well suited for it.
And to that point, Brock, about central banks, what are your thoughts on the direction they're going in terms of digital currencies? There's talk in the ECB, China's rolling one out. The Fed has hinted that we'll see one in the US as well. What's your take?
Well, we created the first system doing that called Tether. We created the US digital dollar, and in our business plan, it was to show governments and central banks how technology can be used to enhance their financial infrastructure, to enhance those systems. The Chinese government is obviously the furthest along with their Chinese digital yuan. That idea from an open source perspective was almost entirely borrowed from us, and many other governments. We spearheaded this, and I think that absolutely we're going to see a lot of it. The world's going digital, technology, and when you get better technology, systems eventually migrate to it. This is better, faster, cheaper, and more secure. And so I anticipate every government in the world will eventually do this.
You mentioned gold before. Other Bitcoin maximalists won't even go there. And we all know about the ongoing debate between these two assets. But you hold gold. You're also friends with Peter Schiff, a huge gold proponent, hater of Bitcoin. What role does gold play for you in this mix?
Gold plays a small role for me. From a portfolio perspective, it's a fairly small part of my portfolio. But in life, I try to always maintain an open mind. I don't become so firm in my convictions to lose sight of everything else, happening in the world. Eventually you get tunnel vision when you have this sort of maximalistic attitude. I view it kind of like religious fundamentalism. You're so fixed in your perspective that you're unable to hear or listen to any other perspective. And generally that's a dangerous way to be. I support everyone in their perspectives and their choices, as long as it's not harming others. But I tend to keep an open mind. I know the future is going to be bright. There's going to be a lot of challenges on the way as systems evolve and change. Change is sometimes a painful process. but I cannot say with certainty that I know what the future holds. I see a lot of potential future, and I try to keep my a hand in everything.
Help me understand what role gold plays for you in your portfolio. Is it a hedge play in accordance with Bitcoin, or how do you see it playing? Or is it just like, hey, why not invest in gold?
I mean, I think as a hedge, as a store of value, in the same way that I buy lots of real estate. These are asset classes that function as a store of value during times of financial uncertainty. And so I have a diversified portfolio of all sorts of things. I'm generally not, I'm have very little activity in the public equities markets right now, basically no debt. I don't like to lend money. The rate of inflation or hyperinflation that I anticipate happening here is much higher than the yields that you're going to receive by buying bonds typically, and on a risk-adjusted basis. Also a problem for me. Right now, my portfolio is almost entirely stores of value, whether it be precious metals, real estate, cryptocurrencies, other things, art, boats, planes, infrastructure.
And we'll get to
farms.
boats in a second. We'll get to boats in a second. But let me ask you this, Brock, is there room in your portfolio for other cryptos? And I ask this especially for those stopping me on the street or my handyman coming over the other day whispering, Cardano, is it the next great thing? How, as an investor, I think is the bigger question, do you know which cryptos to trust?
Yeah, so I think you can watch any interview, any speech I've ever made, and I don't think I've ever encouraged anyone to buy more than $100 worth of Bitcoin, because I don't want to give people financial advice. I want to give people the encouragement to participate, to get involved, so that they can make informed decisions for themselves. The world is changing, and the future is going to happen to you or with you, and I encourage everyone to get involved. But it starts with the process of learning. It's hard for anyone to take advantage of you if you're making decisions for yourself. It's very easy to be taken advantage of when people say, go do this, and you follow blindly. And so in the future, you're going to need some training, and that's how to secure and protect your things and all that stuff. But the thing that I do when looking at projects, what determines long-term success? Remember, this is open source technology, so you can copy anything. First mover advantage, being first, gives you a window of opportunity, but it won't sustain what you're building long-term. The long-term value of these projects are what problem are you trying to solve, right? There's a lot of solutions looking for a problem. You want to make sure that there's a fundamental premise to what is this attempting to solve for, and why do you think it's going to work? The community is probably the most important thing. The community that's behind it. Do you have enough critical mass of people supporting it, talking about it, believing in it, having faith in it? And then ultimately the leadership as well. Who are the key individuals behind the project, and go watch their videos, and do they give you comfort? When this person talks, does it inspire confidence? Do your red flags go off? And do your research is the best advice, and trust your judgment. And I'm involved in I've been involved in over 100 crypto projects. So I mean, I'm not exclusive to Bitcoin. I was a very early participant in a big way in the Ethereum ecosystem. I was one of the co-founders of Block One, where we created EOS, which had a $4.2 billion token sale. A lot of that Bitcoin was just merged into a $9 billion SPAC called Bullish, which the former president of the New York Stock Exchange is the CEO of. You can find that. I think that's trading now.
Yeah, and I think when you were going down that list of checklist, what to look for, it makes me think of kind of the same homework you should be doing when you're investing in gold and silver mining stocks, right? Like, who are the players? Who are the people behind the companies? But from what I'm hearing from you, perhaps then, and again, you're not giving financial advice, but don't necessarily go all in, but test the waters first if you do want to try one of these up and coming cryptos.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely walk before you run. If you come out the gate running without having done your research, you may get lucky and make a bunch of money, but those are also the the situations where you find yourself losing everything. Understand that this is a long game of change, and we go through market cycles. The markets go up, the markets come down, the markets go up, the markets come down. And so being patient and not putting all of your eggs in one basket is, I think, generally sound advice.
Can you comment on, let's say, 3 crypto projects you find interesting right now? Are you allowed to say that?
Sure. I mean, I'll just talk about a couple of projects that I've been working on this last, call it, week or so. One is a project called Packet, or PKT. They're trying to solve for the excess bandwidth that you have on your devices and to create kind of a mesh network to create a kind of a decentralized connection. And this is an interesting project. You've got Helium in the market with, call it a $30 billion market cap. Packet's got a $100 million market cap. And, to us, it looks like it's got greater potential. And so this is the first time I've ever spoken about this publicly, but, I don't mind. These are just the things that I've been buying this last, week or two. Another project, which is highly speculative, but I don't know if you've been following this non-fungible token or NFT sector.
Of course, Brock, of course.
I was one of the groups that bought NFT.com. I was the second largest investor. That got merged into a company called Immutable Holdings that goes public today. The stock tickers hold on the Neo exchange. I'm not very active in that, but I've got a lot of NFT activity. But one of the projects that we've been participating in lately is called Zoo. This is a game. You buy eggs, they hatch, and it's an NFT project. So generally, I'd steer clear of that if that's not your game. That's highly speculative. It's not like Packet. These are NFTs like art and games. The likelihood of projects failing are much higher in this area because they're not solving fundamental technical problems to change the infrastructure of how the world works. But those are the 2 projects that we've done in the last week.
Finally, Brock, I'd love, I don't want to water down this incredible interview with forecasts, but look, people love forecasts, and I'd love to know your thoughts on where you think Bitcoin could be headed. I mean, I've heard everything by year end, 100,000, 250,000, 500,000. Where do you stand?
Well, I mean, I think any of it's possible. I think by year end, a $500,000 Bitcoin is extremely unlikely. Do I think we could have a $500,000 Bitcoin in the next year or 2 or 3? Much more likely. But by year end, probably not. Could we see a $100,000 Bitcoin by year end? It's possible, but so much of it is, again, determined by things that are outside of the control of the Bitcoin community, right? It's, do we have any major sort of financial shock, to the system? What happens? Bitcoin's price movement is ultimately supply and demand driven, right? Are a bunch of people running in to buy Bitcoin at a greater rate than they have been, call it throughout the year? That would drive that. I think it's certainly possible. I would predict that Bitcoin ends higher this year than where it is today. By how much, I can't say, and clearly it could end up down.
Finally, Brock, you mentioned ships before, midway through the interview. I have to bring up, you recently brought or saved a Portuguese freight liner, saying that you never know when you're going to need an arc. So if I have to piece these puzzle pieces together, okay, he now owns a semi-arc, he's in gold, he's in Bitcoin. Do you think the world's ending? What are you preparing for, Brock?
The ARC comment was more of a joke than anything, but a half joke. There is, again, I have an open mind, and so I see kind of future potentials, and not all of it is good in the short term. But sometimes to get to a better, brighter future, you have to go through change, and change can be a painful process of systems. Going from the old to the new. But ideally, we want a system where everybody wins together. We want the old and the new to collaborate, as much as possible. And so I got called to buy this. I like to preserve historic things. And a friend calls me up and says, Brock, I got a historic thing for you. This Portuguese ship that was built in 1961 for the president, and then it took over by the royal family. So this presidential royal ship, it's like one of the most important vessels in the world. And because of the COVID lockdowns, the bank, whatever, it's about to be sold at auction for scrap. No one can get there. Would you like to save it? This is a national treasure. I'm like,
how do you say no?
Well, generally, but I'm like, okay, it's being sold below scrap. Okay, so there's not too much risk in theory. I got to make a decision very quickly. I'm like, I would like to have a better understanding of maritime law and how the world's shipping industries work. And then I'm like, well, you never know when you're going to need an ARC. And that was kind of my joke that sealed the deal. I said, all right, let's do it.
Yeah.
And so this was absolutely gamble. This was just one of those, like, I figured I had minimal downside and a lot of upside, but also with purpose, the ability to save truly a very important national treasure, a historic thing and from being scrapped. And so, between the combination of it, by the way, I bought a second cruise ship already. I think another boat this week. I'll probably be buying lots of cargo ships. I'm getting very active in the.
Where are you docking them all? Where are they?
Well, the first one's in Lisbon right now,
right.
The Funchal, which is the Portuguese vessel. The second one is in Rotterdam, so in the Netherlands.
Right.
The more pleasure version is here in Puerto Rico. I was on my boat yesterday.
Very cool.
Taking it back from the Dominican Republic, and so. I'm just very interested. Well, when you think about, carbon emission, right? When we talk about the environment, the largest contributor to that is the freight industry. And I've got access to some technologies that can make a massive impact on that industry. And so I may go deep down that rabbit hole.
Wow. Final question for you, Brock. This is fascinating insights. If we were to see, or this revolution, crypto revolution, do you think we first have to have a complete financial collapse for that to happen?
No, and I hope not. I don't want to see a revolution. I'd like to see an evolution. I'd like to see us evolve into a system that works for everybody with a lot less chaos. But I think we're going to see that in some parts of the world. Remember you can see systems break down in certain places, like we've seen in Greece and otherwise, and it doesn't cause the whole world the whole world's financial system to fail, though it's a possibility. I hope that doesn't happen, because that's not going to be that's not a good way to transition to a better system. It's possible because of the way that the global financial system is so connected to each other. It can have a kind of a domino-like effect, because we're so reliant upon each other that you could see something catastrophic happen on a global scale just because of the interconnectedness of everything. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. It's a possibility, but I certainly hope not.
On that note, Brock, it's been a pleasure. I'm happy we were finally able to connect. Come back anytime to StansberryInvestor.com. I thoroughly enjoyed this interview. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. We'll have much more for you, so be sure to stay tuned. In the meantime, don't forget to sign up for premier access to content you can't get anywhere else at danielacambone.com. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.